everybody, welcome to Rocket Lasso Live, episode 10 of season 5. How is everyone doing? We've got people on YouTube, we've got people on Twitch. We have LeBadger, who is subscribing again for the 8th month. Appreciated. Thank you very much. Ooh, and we've got Rob, who's been here for 10 months. I appreciate that. It's a great way of supporting Rocket Lasso. Anyway, we've got some stuff to cover today. If people have questions, we'll try and work them in. But I thought something that'd be cool is something we haven't done in a while, which is a themed episode. And I thought an obvious theme to try and tackle would be focusing on some scene node stuff and capsules in general. So capsules, bringing nodes into the object manager and using them as modeling tools and selections and all that. We've been doing a lot with that. Obviously, Rocket Lasso is very directly involved with that type of stuff right now. In addition to that, because the DAT tour has been going on, the Design and Animation Tour, which is touring around the country and going to a couple other countries, at that, a major part of my presentation is about nodes. And I've been kind of polling the audience and asking... I've been asking everybody if they've been using scene nodes and if they've been... how familiar they are with the tools Rocket Lasso has been making, and very, very few people are actually familiar. So I thought we could try and do a little bit of stuff along those lines, recap a couple of the tools, maybe, well, yeah, I shouldn't promise anything I can't do, but just tackle that, maybe do some direct node stuff, maybe make some basic, a basic tool or something, show people that there's some basic stuff we can do that is not intimidating and can actually, be pretty powerful. Having said that, there are some other things to cover. One of the big things is Maxon is having a sale right now. They're having the biggest sale that they've had, I think bigger than anything they've had in like 3 years or something. I should probably pull open a window for that. Let me open up something, search. Actually, I don't have a link to that. Let me link via my link. I got that in my notes. Select this link and new. Paste, open, and where does that go? Cool. Yeah, that goes directly to it. So anyway, here's what I wanted to mention. So Maxon right now is having a big giant sale. You can get 40% off new annual subscription. So you have to not already have an annual subscription, and 30% off if you just want to specifically get Cinema 4D. So of course, Maxon 1 is Cinema 4D and ZBrush and Red Giant and Redshift, and yeah, you see all the stuff listed here. So yeah, a lot of stuff comes along with the annual subscription. But here's why I'm talking about it more is Maxon gave the opportunity for a couple of content creators to be able to get, what's the word? Like a commission for them. So for this very limited time, if you do pick up Cinema 4D, then you'll actually be supporting Rocket Lasso at the same time, which is pretty cool. So yeah, just for this couple days, that's going to be a thing. So I've got a very direct link, and there's going to be links flying around all over the place. So I just put the link in YouTube and on Twitch, and it goes to, if you don't already have a Maxon 1 subscription, and you're watching me, a lot of stuff I do is using the capsules and all the node stuff that I've been making, and you don't have access to that right now. So it's a good opportunity to get a huge discount from that and be able to get access to like all the cool tools that Rocket Lasso has been making. So that's cool. But also Rocket Lasso is doing an additional sale. So if you purchase the 40% off Maxon 1, you're going to get 40% off of all the Rocket Lasso tools as well. So that's a special coupon that we're creating and just sending out to everybody who buys the Maxon 1. So if you do buy it through Rocket Lasso, you're going to get like an extra bonus on top of that. 40% is a bigger discount than we've ever had on any of our plugins. So it's just a couple day thing, very short notice. But anyway, that's the end of those details. I'll mention that again near the end. But if you've been thinking about getting Cinema 4D, it's not, you're not going to get a better price than this for probably years again, and you'll be supporting Rocket Lasso. So anyway, deeply appreciated if anybody wants to go check that out. But for the most part, I think we are good to jump in and start talking about node stuff. Rob, I appreciate that. Already has all the plugins. So and obviously you've also been subscribed on Twitch, so you are already supporting and it is deeply appreciated. Having said that, if you have questions that are along the lines of anything node themed, and we can potentially be modeling, building out some things based on nodes, because I've been using nodes for a modeling workflow now for a while. So we got a couple different things, but I can just kind of start tinkering around with stuff. And then if people have questions, I imagine as I go through and talk about nodes, people will be like, oh, what about this? What about this? Can we try that? So let's keep all that in mind. Anyway, let's switch over to the screen. Start playing around. So of course we are here in 2023.2. It's actually pretty important to be in the newest version. I guess that's a reason to be in Maxon 1. You're always going to have the newest stuff. And that is because like tons and tons of changes have been being made inside of the node stuff. A lot of organizational stuff inside of nodes that are things that Rocket Lasso has like recommended. Because in addition to us making a bunch of tools inside, using nodes to essentially make plugins. Anyway, for anybody who's not familiar, if you go into your asset browser, of course, this is going to show lots of different stuff. You can always click on new content. That's going to show new things that have shipped recently. So you'll see lots of materials. There's a big focus on Redshift materials and HDRs, different images, but you also see that we got some Rocket Lasso tools hiding in there. But under all, you just search Rocket Lasso, and you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff that is actually made by Rocket Lasso. So here's a bunch of example files, but the real meat of it here is down here in these node operators. So these are all brand new tools that we've been making, and all of these are they take a while. It takes a month to build each one of these, but everything that you see that these do are things you can create from scratch with nodes. So we'll go over a couple of these kind of organically. I don't want to just like start listing through, but we're working on more. We've actually got a couple like already essentially ready to go. I've been building out demo files. Actually, here's a I think I can do a little tease for a file here. I'll open up this, and I'm not going to click on the tool, but here's a little preview of a tool that's going to be shipping soon. So I traced out some splines here, and you can see I got all these really fun trails traveling up that plant. So all that's automatically being animated. So that's an upcoming tool. So there's a little sneak preview for you. Yeah, very excited for that one. It's going to be cool. Now, a good thing is when it comes to, I want to think of the right framing device. So we've been making all these tools. Obviously, Rocket Lasso makes plugins, and plugins we make the plugins with C++. So we're writing raw code. That code's getting compiled. It's ready for Cinema 4D. You install it in the plugin folder. But when it comes to these node capsules, it's almost like a full-on plugin. It's like a full-on tool inside of Cinema, but the process is completely different. It's unrelated. The plugins we make, we sell directly, but the capsules we make are under contract with Maxon. So you get access to these if you have a subscription to Maxon 1. You see this little icon here? Anywhere you see that icon, that means it's a subscription to Maxon 1. Everything that doesn't have that icon is actually available with just a Cinema 4D subscription. But if you want everything, obviously the Maxon 1 will give you more. Having said that, we've got all these really cool modifiers and generators and deformers. So if I were to drag in like the stair generator, it's going to bring in a brand new object, and you can do a whole bunch of different things with an actual set of stairs here with lots of different parameters. So this is like a full-on plugin, essentially. But you can also just think of it as like, oh, well, it's like a primitive. Like here's a stair primitive where we can make here's a very simple set of stairs where we don't have to overthink any any properties here. We're just like, okay, where's the step height? What's the step width, depth? So easy primitive here that you can just use and generate stairs that you want. Now, one of the cool things when it comes to all the stuff that Rocket Lasso is making is technically you can go inside of those and see how we built it. So if I were to make a copy of the FUI graph, and this is one that my brother Danny is also working on these with me. So he is doing all the heavy lifting as far as the node coding, and some of them I'm doing. So this one this is the one I programmed. I spent a bunch of time on it. But if you right click on any node, or even better, we can go into the node layout, we can drag the capsule in here, and here's like the FUI graph. But now I can say edit asset as group, and now I can go inside of it, and you can actually see everything that went into making it. So here you can see all these different nodes and all these different modes where it's like down here, like this is generating the noise. This is generating all of the noise to create these random graphs. And then a different section over here is like generating the random numbers. And the different section here is generating like the typed in index numbers. And everything gets broken apart into different sections. Here's generating a line graph. There's actually a lot more to it. There's an entire group. So here's like stuff happening inside of a group. But you see, that's generating. Here you see I labeled it line graph, And then we're generating the stepped line graph, and we're generating the bar graph. And down here is the pi mode. So yeah, lots of different stuff. Anyway, the point being is you can open up any tool that Rocket Lasso made and reverse engineer or check things out, see how we built it, go inside. Obviously, those are going to be a little bit more advanced. There's a lot going on, and I don't want this to seem too intimidating. I know any code stuff or node stuff is always going to look intimidating. Like, that's just a fact as you build things out. But hopefully today we can spend a little bit of time building something out. And when you're actually trying to build something out, you just build it step by step by step, and you're like, okay, cool. As you build it, it's not that intimidating. It's not scary when you're actually seeing every single step that went into it. So yeah, we're going to kind of jump around. Sometimes we'll pop into a tool, see what the tool can do. Other times we'll jump into make some nodes. Sometimes we'll just play with some modeling tools. But I do want to check out the chat and see if anybody has any questions specifically, so we can kind of steer the direction. Yep, excellent. Oh yeah. So Rob was saying that you did go and snag Max on 1, but you already have all the plugins. Tobias, I feel like you need to chill a little bit. Going back at some of the previous comments, every single stream. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not even going to cover that. Yeah, there are a lot of nodes there. A ladder capsule. Well, I mean, a ladder would be a neat idea. Question. Mick is asking, can we incorporate procedural architecture? Heck yeah, you can. People are asking, these are ideas. I mean, if you want to throw ideas out there, there's potential that I could always add things to the list. I'm not sure about the legality of knowing different details of that type of stuff. So maybe it's a bad idea for you to throw out ideas. But as far as doing stuff right now in the live stream, which I'm going to interpret everybody is saying, then yeah, these are totally things we can do. Actually, that's what Tobias, that's an excellent idea. As a basic way of doing some modeling, using some nodes, making like a ladder is actually a really, really good idea. So let's do sort of a hybrid method here. So what I'm thinking is we'll just be building a rig, and we'll have a few controls that we need, a few controls, but we're not going to have to worry too much about them. But we got a couple things to cover. Let's say we're going to make a ladder. So I'm thinking we just make a simple plane, and we make it only have one width segment, and that is essentially our ladder. The more segments we add in vertically, that will be the number of steps that the ladder will have, and we can make it as tall as we want or as wide as we want. So cool, very simple rig. Not a bad idea to make it kind of real world scale. So if we make our figure here, scaling this down so it looks like a ladder, that would be about right for the character. Not a bad idea. Okay, so for people who don't know, obviously, if you want to make new nodes, like that seems very intimidating. If we went into the nodes layout, which is a good way to start working with nodes, you can build things from scratch and output them to the scene node, but then it's not really interacting with your object manager. And there's a lot of nodes and things you got to worry about. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to build stuff almost as if we're just using deformers. So what you can do along those lines, if you didn't know, and let me show you. Let's go to nodes so I can do this step by step. If we move into our node layout and we move into nodes as a drop down, and there's two folders essentially. There's a couple more, but most of the time we're going to be spending our time inside of geometry selections and geometry generators. So these two folders are actually really, really powerful, really important. Or did I say generator? I meant modifier. Geometry modifiers and geometry selections. So these are going to be creating lots of power for you. I'm going to go to a list view and shrink down the list. And you see we've got a whole bunch of different stuff. Some of these are going to be really familiar, where essentially it's like things we can do as a modeling tool, like melt. We can melt things as a node. What's cool about that is we're doing it procedurally. But there's other things that, there's like chamfers and bevels. Like we already have a bevel deformer, but there's also a node version of it. But typically, if you're doing something here, you would be like, well, you drag in an extrude, and then you drag in a melt, and you have to connect nodes where these are getting connected together and getting output. So it's like, well, okay, if that's worrying people, it's like you don't have to worry about that. You can ignore all that node stuff. Let's go back to our standard layout. And now, moving into, again, our geometry modifiers, I would like to view it as a list. Let's start making this into a very simple ladder shape. So a first thought is, we probably need to do some sort of inset here. So look, there's an inset node. So if I grab this node, I can drag it directly into the viewport or directly into the object manager. We are now using a node, and we're using a node in the object manager, which means it's taken the node and it's encapsulated it, which is why that has the term capsule. This is now a capsule. So in this case, it is a geometry modifier capsule. So if I drop this as a child, we're using a node, but directly as a modeling operation. And we can now see that we've done these lovely insets on the entire structure. So obviously we could do this as a manual modeling technique. And I guess you could kind of fake it with the MoGraph, what do you call it? The Mo extrude could technically do something like this. But, right now we could do proportional. I could do a very set amount. So we could just move in 2 on each. So that's pretty clean. So yeah, actually I kind of like the look of that. And then, if we're making a ladder, well, we need to get rid of these inside polygons. Well, we would need to delete them, obviously, if we're doing this manually. But in this case, we have a node we can do it. Look, there's a delete node. So after we've inset, I can say delete. Now, you'll notice everything went away. Why did everything go away? Well, this is all about selections. Right now, in Cinema, I'll make this editable for a moment. I've turned everything off except the plane. Right now, if I say I for inset and I drag, you'll see I have nothing selected. And in Cinema 4D, if nothing's selected, that's as if everything's selected. So if I click and drag, you can see an inset happened. But if I select all, you'll also see that everything gets an inset. If I were to select only 3 polygons and say I for inset, you'll see it only goes to part of it. So always remember, if nothing's selected, everything's selected. So I want to effectively say, well, I want everything selected because right now nothing is selected. So if I say, well, and let me tell you why. Again, make this editable, select all these. And if I say, now that they're all selected, if I say I for inset, I'll even turn off preserve groups and I pull these in, you'll see because I selected everything, when I inset, only the polygons that used to be selected are selected. Every newly created polygon is not selected. And that's the power that we want to use here. If I had nothing selected here and I do an inset, you'll see everything shrinks, but still nothing is selected. And if nothing's selected, everything's selected. And that means if I delete, it deletes everything. So keeping in mind those principles, the first thing we want to do is a geometry selection. And the most powerful one of all of them is this select node. So if I drag that in first, you'll see that we can say, are we selecting points or edges or polygons? But right now we're saying polygons. So I'm going to say I want to set my selection, and I could just type in the word all. That means select all polygons. Now there's a bunch of different things you can type in there. I could say all, I could say default. You can type in the word even. You could type in the word odd. I could type in 1 through 3. That will select the first 3 polygons. Now obviously right now we can't see what that's doing, but if I activate my inset, then now, and yeah, we are not preserving groups. So now you can actually see based on the selection, what is happening. So we've now selected 1 through 3, and those 3 are selected, which means those 3 get the inset. But look, we haven't made anything editable here. If we wanted to modify our ladder and say, actually, there should be a few extra steps and it should be a little bit taller or a little bit wider, we can do that without making anything destructive, without baking anything down. So back to our selection, again, I could say odd, and now it selects every other. You can do like kind of math on here where I could say I want to do 0 through 4 plus odd. And now if I did that correctly, which just doesn't seem that I did. Okay, I'm not doing something quite right there. Because odd works, even does. Because you can do essentially mathematical operations here and you can do some fancy ones, but I seem to be missing some detail in there. So if I say even and then say -2, actually 2 might be being selected. Well, maybe I have to make selections out of those. So I take that back for now. But anyway, you can see I can do things like 5 through 9, and those are selected. But anyway, for now, I just want to say all. I'm selecting all our polygons. Now they are all selected, which means we inset, and only those inside ones are selected, which means if only the inside ones are selected, I now say delete, then those inside ones get deleted just by adding the select in. So yeah, really basic setup right there so far. But let's say, well, now we want to add some thickness. At any point, of course, we could bring in regular deformers, but allow those exist inside of this setup. So we can go to something as simple as an extrude, drop that after the delete. And now, okay, right now, nothing is selected. So that means I'm going to extrude everything. It's probably a good idea to select all again. So I'm going to say select dot all, just so I remember what that is. Come on. Dot all. Man, I cannot type. Dot all. There we go. So if I duplicate that after we've deleted, I can say select all. And now with everything selected, I would like to extrude. What do I want to extrude? I want to extrude the polygons. So with the polygons selected on the default selection, we are currently offsetting by a certain amount. So you see those are getting extruded however far we want. Just like the regular extrude, we can use islands. Really important. You can see right here, every single individual polygon is getting extruded. Let's go to 0. You can see as I extrude that every single one is separate, which obviously would be kind of a pain. But you just say use islands, and now it's hollow. And then, as extrude regularly has, we have create caps. Turn that on. We've now sealed that off. And I can see that we've got the structure where we could be building some sort of vent or grate or ladder or, this is a very obviously simple setup here, but you can see what we were able to do procedurally. And now I can do, and I can add all sorts of subdivisions. You can now see we've made kind of a full parametric stack that we can build a rig out of and make nice, simple, well, in this case, very simple, but something pretty cool. Now, let's say we want our ladder pivoting from the ground level. Right now we are, it's pivoting from the 0 point, but in addition to there being built in, a lot of nodes that we couldn't do parametrically before, like inset, and being able to do brand new functions like we couldn't, like delete, there's also like kind of new concepts as well. One of my favorite ones is the axis. We've got geometry axis. So I've mentioned this one before, but we can put this kind of any step, first or last. So I'll just do it as the first step. Turn this all off. So geometry axis is going to say, well, I'm looking at all of your bounding box essentially, and I'm going to take that bounding box and move the center of the bounding box right to 0, right to the axis of the object. But then we can offset that. So based on the bounding box, I could say, actually, I'd like this to be offset 100% based on the bounding box. So now if we go back and make that figure, you can see the figure standing right there on the ground. And now this ladder is also sitting on the ground. And it's the very first thing that happens. So now we can say, okay, now select all, then inset, then delete, select all, extrude. It's a little small right now, but I can just hit T for scale and the whole thing will scale up. So yeah, geometry axis, we are able to offset that. We can pivot left or right on there. Again, nothing's been made editable. And based on like the way we're layering this up, it seems like a pretty straightforward hierarchy here. So yeah, I agree. The geometry axis is just one I reach for all the time. Now there are a couple other functions that are pretty handy as well. So right now I've got this overall ladder, and you could have something complex, but there's another one called geometry resize, and I've been using this a lot with text actually. I actually did it for my graphics for the Max on 1 sale, where I'll drop this in. I'll do it as the last thing right now. And you'll see suddenly it jumps up to be really big. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, well, here's a number. And we're saying, well, this object currently is 37 wide. But this geometry axis is saying, well, it should be 100 wide. So scale everything up until X is exactly 100. But we also say, well, I want it to be Y is 100. So that becomes really tiny. That's exactly 100 tall. We could fit it into a 100 by 100 by 100 bounding box just by clicking bounding box here. You see the entire thing is stretched to fill essentially a cube of it. And I haven't played with user access, but presumably we can do, customized. We can do all three at the same time with varying ratios if we want. So this one can be really handy for something like text. So if I open up a new scene file, I've been doing a lot of graphics, just for myself, where one that I do all the time is like this text. I always click middle, but it's kind of like, well, I want it to be middle. I want the axis to be at the center. So obviously, geometry axis, drop that as a child, and now it's right dead center in that text. And let's just say nodes. And let's change the font. Search. Lemon milk bold. There you go. So nice, big, blocky font. And then it's like, well, I'm trying to build out, let's say, I'm trying to build out the sail graphics. So I could say max on 1. And then I say, well, I want everything. Okay, let me get my thoughts in order. I make a duplicate of that, and I go, well, I want that. I want to say 40%. So I can say 40%. And you'll see, it's like, okay, well, it's centered axis-wise, but what if I want the graphic to be like matching the width overall? So now I could say, well, give me a geometry resize after each of those. And in this case, I'll say I want it to be, and we're on X, so I'll say I want that to be exactly 200. And I'll say that the other one I want also to be exactly 200. So now you can see I was able to center these and scale them exactly to the same size. Again, parametrically, super clean. And I think you can even get fancier than this. I think I could just make a null and drop these inside the null and only use one of those. Yeah, so yeah, now you can see this geometry resize will actually act upon both of those. So if I was to copy that and then say, let's see, just type in Rocket Lasso, boop. Now you can see that has automatically adapted the scale as well. If I turn this off, you see everything's wacky different scales, but now I can easily have my perfectly in the center exactly matching the width. So I've actually been using these like all the time to do this type of thing where like it's really clean, where I'm like, man, I really wish I could do this easily in like Illustrator or Photoshop, like have the scales be proper, because even right now, like it's adapting. So let's say I wanted more spacing here. I can add horizontal spacing and you see that there's more spacing, but the width is being perfectly maintained. And there's like, there's an intuition that you get here where it just feels very natural, which I sort of wasn't expecting, where, I don't know, it just became a little bit easier for me to design things because I didn't have to worry about scaling up and then down and up and down. So it is what it is right here. Yeah, excellent. So geometry axis, geometry resize, both of those are great. There is geometry orientation where you can automatically change the orientation of an object if you want to keep it parametric. Can't think of too many specific uses there, but there are others that have nice uses. Like here's geometry clone. So purely as a modeling operation, I can say, okay, give me a geometry clone, and I would like to make a copy of this ladder, one clone, offset it, and let's see if yeah, that's gonna be on Y right now. Oh, so here's the axis. So I could say move it on X and offset it based on a position. Actually, that's a little odd. Oh, extrude, let's say extrude all. I had to select all again. That geometry clone was only acting on part of it, which is another important thing to remember. I didn't select all, so I said, okay, select all again. So now cloning all of that, and again, this is a modeling operation. We're not using a cloner and making two separate objects that would need to be baked down. Right now, this object this is the model. It's as if you just take a cube and bent it. So yeah, that is just what the model is now. So if I were to right click on that and say current state to object, and move it over, you see, or here's the copy. You can just see that here is that object created. Excellent. I don't need that clone, so I think that's I'll say select all. Doesn't hurt anything. So that's where we're at right now, just modeling out a very, very simple ladder. Obviously, there's a lot more fancy things we could do where we could make copies of cylinders and duplicate them up, make fancier rigs, multiple models. So yeah, Tobias, you're correct. Like, yeah, I was doing it with the scale of the text, but that could be for like literally anything. Model out like a bench for this character to sit on and say, well, that should be exactly 200 wide or 100 tall. Just automatically scales to it without it being destructive. So you can see right now that we made this entire stack here where we're doing a whole series of things. So that's pretty cool. And let's say we want to make a cube here. And the cube we'll do 2 by 2 by 2. And we want to do the same thing to the cube. Well, I could select that entire stack and hold down Control and drag a copy of it over. And now you'll see that the same effect has been applied to the cube overall. So like, okay, that's a cool look, but we have to manually copy everything to that. So now let's talk about making like a whole custom tool. And this is a lot of what Rocket Lasso is doing. We're just doing very fancy versions of it with like raw math. But let's move into, well, here's a very specific but special thing we can do. We want to go into a different folder called Asset Construction. And inside of here are essentially empty versions of basic cinema concepts. So right here is a mesh primitive group. That's like a sphere or a cube or a cone. That's a raw polygon object that's parametric. And then we have like a selection, and here's a spline primitive, and well, there's a couple different types there. What I want to do is make a new deformer, and a new deformer, essentially these are all deformers, so I'll make a brand new one, and that new deformer is going to just be a geometry modifier group. So I'll drag that over. So here's a brand new geometry modifier group. Now all of these are fundamental nodes made by Maxon. If I double click on them, you'll see nothing happens. I just double click, static. But we've got this new geometry modifier group. If I double click on that, it's actually going to pop open a floating version of the node editor. And this is actually my preferred way of working. Like we can get this floating window, don't have to change the entire interface. We get access to all the nodes really easily by searching in our assets browser here, or even potentially better, something they added in the newest version of Cinema is the ability to flip open the asset browser on the left side of the screen. And not only that, this is not the entire asset browser. It's only node stuff. So it instantly goes to nodes, and we get access to all that stuff instantly. So that's pretty cool. And then you can also get a attribute manager built into this window. So even right here, instead of changing my entire layout, I can just double click and say, okay, I want to full screen that and give me my nodes and give me the attributes of them. And it's just in this one window. And that also works in the material editor when it comes to like making Redshift materials now. So anyway, I will pull this down. Let's modify that just a bit. Because what I want to do is make our own custom tool. I'm not even sure what to call this. Let's just say that this will be, for lack of a better term, we'll just say ladderize. So this is a ladderizer. Actually, let's call it ladderizer. That's even better. So we're making a ladderizer. Well, what happens in a ladderizer? Well, the first thing we do is a geometry axis. So let's go and track that down. A couple things you could do. First of all, we can just find it manually inside our geometry modifier. So we can change our list and go track it down. So here's our geometry axis. So something we should probably do is match our parameters. So you see that I'm going to want it to be 100%. So we'll select that and say 100%. Now, it's not going to be actively doing anything yet. So what we should say is, well, what does it want? It wants geometry in. And what's it going to give us? Geometry out. So here is, because of the nature of this ladderizer, because of the nature of this geometry modifier group, it is now giving us geometry. So, okay, I'm going to say, well, whatever geometry you're feeding me, that will go inside here. And then when it's modified things, it will output it as this geometry. So now all we did was put in the single node, but we've got this, I'll turn all that off for a moment. We've got this cube and it's sitting on the ground. If I take ladderizer and I drop it as a child of the cube, you're gonna see it jumps up into the air automatically. This node now, this tool that I'm building now contains the geometry axis tool. So what happens next? Well, we need to do a select all. So let's go and grab our select. Here's a new feature that got added, is you can drag it directly onto the wire and it'll interject. So it's in between the two. This should say select all. What happens after that? Well, we do an inset. So let's grab, okay, so I want to keep showing you all the different ways. So you can manually find it. Now we can search for the word inset. And you'll see it'll pop up in the list. Again, I can click and drag this, drop it inside. Let's match again. Let's say it's supposed to not be proportional. So it gives us a literal number and we'll type in 3. Seems to be good. Excellent. So that's an inset. But in addition to that, I almost never keep this window on the left open because essentially you can get to an instant mini version. Well, I guess actually here's a third way and we'll do a fourth. If you click Shift C, you'll pop open your commander and it's going to be ready to type in specifically nodes. The commander is really smart and it knows that I am inside the node window. So now it's only going to search for nodes. So what I want now is a delete. So I search for the word delete and there's a delete node. And again, I can drag it directly in and interject in between those two. Now, the last way we can add nodes in, you can probably even add them, well, you can right click and click. But the way I typically do is all you do is double click anywhere in the void and that is going to pop open your commander. Now, what I want next is another select all. What I'd probably do is just duplicate this one, manually link that back in again. So we've got another select all and then we need an extrude. So I don't think we can if I double click the line, it'll delete it. But if I double click in the middle of nowhere and I type in the word extrude, then here's another thing we requested. You saw where I double clicked. Let's do that again. If I double click up here in the left and I type in extrude, when I click extrude, double click it, it appears wherever I clicked my mouse. Before it used to like appear in the middle of the screen and it's hard to find. But anyway, we can drag this over. I don't think there's an automatic way. You make a duplicate of this, but there's no way of interjecting it in the line. That'd be kind of a nice feature to have. But let's link those. And now we're doing extrusion. It is polygon based. We're offsetting by 20. Let's just offset by 4. Let's keep it even. We'll say 3. And we should probably use islands. And we should probably create caps. We know we are doing all that. And then if we want, we can select all those final polygons. So we can just duplicate that. Select again. And interject that there. So now you see essentially I've remade that entire stack of modifiers inside of this one object. If you didn't know, inside of nodes, and I think this goes for the material nodes as well, I could have this be all kind of messy. I can select all and just hit L, and L will organize them pretty well. If you get super crazy with lots of branching things, it'll get pretty nuts. But now you can see I've strung all of these together. We're doing each of those things, and that now exists as a single tool right now. This now exists as a single modifier. So if I were to create any other sort of primitive, let's make a cylinder, scoot this off the side, I can be like, okay, laderize, drop that inside, and now it's put it on the floor. It's done the inset, the select all, everything we want to do, and you see I've now made a new tool just by doing a practice run of manually doing it here in the object manager, being like, okay, cool, I designed what I wanted, and now we made the automatic node version, and this will calculate faster as of right now, where this stack, string them together in nodes means it's only traveling from the object manager into the world of nodes, saying like, okay, cool, here's what I did, and then back to Cinema. Where technically this stack is doing a more complicated thing, which is still pretty quick. But what this is doing right now is saying, I'm in the world of Cinema, create a geometry axis, modify it, go into nodes, bring it back to Object Manager. Okay, select all. Okay, Object Manager, back to nodes, back over to Object Manager. So it's kind of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, every single node. By stringing them together, it's going to be quicker. But anyway, you can now see that we've made a nice little tool, nothing super crazy. So why don't we make it so we can expose some of those key parameters that we were doing? Because, in this entire tool, in this ladder generator or cage generator or whatever, there's only a handful of settings that we're going to want to play with. Let's see. Oh, well, Scott is making a request. That's not a bad request. Let's drop this as, we don't need this anymore because we built that. So delete. You're asking, I'm trying to think if there's an easy way, but right now these rungs are twice as thick as the outer bit, which I'm with you, and that could definitely annoy me a bit. So I'm trying to think of the easiest way. I was kind of ignoring that element, trying to keep this as simple as possible. But what is, how do I want to go about that? Because I can think of a lot of different methods. What's the cleanest way? Because I kind of want to go step by step here and not lose anybody. And I think the easiest way, I'm not sure if it'll look good, but I'm thinking we just do an extra inset in the beginning. So I'm going to kind of do a guess here. Let's select all and we do this inset. So in between these two steps, and what we could do is just bypass this and say, okay, now we're looking at this step. So instead of building it here in the object manager, I'll build it directly with nodes. So I'm thinking I want another inset, delete that. So with this inset, I'll drag that out. And what that's going to do is do an inset overall. But if I say use islands, then now you can see it's done just an inset on these inner parts of it. So now you see I've actually got that same inset on the outside. So the hope is if I drag this into this inset and output that final output, there we go. You can now see that we've got that extra thickness that went around the entire outside. Now, we did just create some redundant geometry, but you'll see if I hide this, now we've got even the thickness on the outside is the same as the rungs on the inside. I guess that there is a problem doing it up there on the top. So yeah, not a perfect solution there. That's the simplest way I could think to do it. Select all, hit L, organize them. What are some other things I might do? I mean, there's so many different ways we could go about this. Yeah, we can get fancy, and I kind of want to, but I don't want to go too crazy because there's a lot of fun bits here. Because right now we are getting this raw input of geometry, but we're just doing a single stream of nodes. But it doesn't have to be a single stream of nodes. We could do fancier things here. So what am I thinking? Let's bypass everything. So we're just outputting the same input. Well, let's keep the geometry axis. I like it offset. Now, is there a good way of what I want to do? I wonder if that works. What I want to do is search for, let's do a select all. So select all after geometry axis. What do I want to select? Well, I don't know if this will work. I want to select all of the edges. Now, we can't visually see that output, so typically the go-to is to make something like an extrude. So if I interject this extrude, you can see I'm extruding all edges. So with all edges selected, you see all of them are extruding. So what I don't think it's going to work, but I'm going to search for a shrink. So here's a shrink selection. Drag that, interject it, and shrink the edges by 1. Yeah, it didn't work. I kind of didn't think so. If we subdivided more, here, let me show you. If I put a couple extra subdivisions in here, you see that we are able to shrink that edge selection on the outside, and we get these inner ones. But this particular shrink selection is not able to select the outermost ring of them. There's probably there might be some sort of outline. Point on outline. I don't even know what that does. Oh, that's way more complicated. Let's bring our nodes in here. There is the convert selection. Would that work for us? Transfer selection, tolerant. The tolerant is the key here. So here's a weird thing. I'm going to try and select all the polygons, and I'm going to attempt to transfer my selection from polygons to edges, and then extrude that. Select all, convert, tolerant. Dang it, it didn't work. That was just a thought. Again, this has to do with a very particular type of outline. I'm trying not to get us into the world of like really specific math. From polygon to edge, select all polygons. I feel like that should be visually doing something here, but maybe tolerance messing it up. I'll have to play around with that. It's weird. But I'm going to skip over that bit right now. Like, just keep it simple, like we sort of have it right now. In fact, I don't even like this inset. Here's another nice thing, though. If you delete a node, it'll just maintain the connections between if they're relevant. But what I'm trying to say, the bigger point here, was with this geometry, we can do multiple instances of it. So if I take this entire stack and duplicate it and do something very different, so let's pipe this in and now put this modify, or this new version, and let's modify it. So now we're offsetting, selecting all, insetting, and let's say we just do a larger inset. So I'm going to do a bigger inset there, and then we're going to delete. But instead of, I'm going to delete all those. Instead of deleting the outside, let's instead of deleting the inside, let's delete the outside. So let's invert our selection. Under selection, you see that we do indeed have a invert. So if I do that, you can see that we've now got these little hovering inside bits. So we've got two different chunks of geometry here, two different streams of geometry. You can see one and the other. So now we take those two bits of geometry and we can just search for a connect. So here's a connect node. We can feed in multiple raw pieces of geometry. So let's just drag that in, and let's drag that one in, and then output our final geometry. And I can see that this single modifier is returning something way more complex. So if we were to spend more time with the ladder and do different subdivisions, different controls, in a lot of ways, like us working from this bit is preventing a lot of what I'd want to do. But you can see how we've got a more complex piece of geometry here. Anyway, that was a bunch of extra stuff. What I really want to do, the next step I think in our process here, is getting some custom parameters going. So let's output that. Here's our ladder. What parameters do we actually care about here? So I think one would be our inset. This is a very important parameter. So if we want to keep it simple, you can just hold down Control and click on this little circle, and you'll see it'll automatically expose that parameter. Now you can also right click and then go to add input, and you'll see all the different parameters listed. But it's very handy to just be like, oh, that's the one I want. Click it and it pops out. So now we can click this and you can drag over to there. You just drag kind of anywhere, empty space, and say add new input. And now it's propagated that property up, and you'll see that if I click on ladderize, we now have an inset with all the same like limits and properties. So I now have this inset control I can do whatever I want with. We then delete, we then extrude. So this extrude seems important. Let's expose that one and output that, add new input. And actually that's kind of, those are the important ones here. So now we've exposed these two different properties. Now technically we could just plug them both in the same thing. We've got that one inset, but I could say actually the inset and the offset should be the same. So now simultaneously, the slider got a little messed up because those are two slightly different properties, but you see the output here looks correct. So you can see I'm able to have one control, and we could propagate any controls we want out and select all of them. Propagate any out, build our controls. Now, like I said, the slider got messed up. You can see right now this is both controlling the inset and the offset. Typically, I'd probably go and try and make some sort of new parameter to do the controls if we're doing something fancier like that. There's other options as well. If we want to avoid what we were seeing there, here's just that lovely simple inset here. We got the slider. Slider's going a little extreme, but what I would do is you can right click and say edit resource, and now you're going to go into kind of the custom user data. Let me change this mode. So here's what you'll see, and here's our inputs, and currently we have a single thing called inset. So right down here you see there's an inset hanging out. So what I might do is right click on that, say copy, and say I just want a brand new one. So I'm going to right click and say paste, and now I've made, is that going to cooperate? Yeah, there's some slight weirdnesses that can happen here, but anyway, here's a new custom inset that I made. I'll just say inset X, just so we can identify it. So now you can see I've made this new property, and inside of here, I mean, it can get a little intimidating. There's a lot of different settings. Most of these you can ignore, but we can set things like the default value. Right now, we already know this is pretty tiny for what we want, so we could say that the default should be 3. We can limit the value, so I can say it's going to have a minimum of 0. We can't go negative. We shouldn't clamp the max. I can go as big as we want to. And then down here, you can do a slider. So I'm showing the slider. It's going to limit the value from between 0 and 300, but let's say between 0 and 10 for the slider. Remember, sliders don't actually clamp anything. It's just how far the slider is allowed to slide. So you see I've got a custom slider that goes from left to right. And then what's the step? We could say like 0.5 or anything, but I think 1 is looking pretty good right now. I think it's still going to fight me if I try and drag that up. Oh, no. See, now that we've renamed it, maybe, it allowed me to drag it up into my inputs. And I don't think that one input's doing anything. And now it's, I don't know. I think there's a bug there. But anyway, we've now got a custom inset. I can close that. And now you see I've got this inset here. I can say, okay, that's our new custom parameter. I want that to control both of these. And let's click off of this, go back, and here now you see our new inputs. Under inputs, you can see I've got this slider. I can drag this up and down, super controllable. And we can very easily set the thickness of both of those parameters, propagating up that port, making, customizing it how we want. And now we've got a custom tool that's doing 7 different steps, making us a simple tool. And what's cool about that is now we have the ability to copy that onto any object. So I can say, okay, that's going to be a new object. There it is, modifying that one, make duplicates. Now, if you want to go all the way and like kind of finalize this as like, okay, this is a tool you're going to be using all the time. Then what you can do is say asset, and you say, it's this overall entire scene. I can say assets, convert to asset, and now it's going to ask you what you want to do to save it. So you can save it to your preference folder. You can save it directly in the scene file. You can save it to some external database. But right now you can see I'm going to save it to preferences. Typically, you don't have to worry about the ID. You can put a version number. So here's my ladderizer under preferences. We could put it into a category. So in this case, I mean, there are very specific categories, and we want this to be under nodes, under a geometry modifier. So we say, okay, that will actually put it into the proper folder for you, which is pretty powerful. And now we can say, okay, and that should have now made that as a tool. So hopefully, I'm not sure if it will, but if we go to geometry modifier, look at that. Ladderizer is now in the list of geometry modifiers. So that's pretty crazy. But now that we've got that, I could go to our details panel here, and this is just for every asset in the asset browser, but by clicking on that, we can now change the name, update it, we can put annotations. Well, if we could make a screenshot and save it, that's actually something that's pretty handy. Let's drop that here, turn off those, and I'll just zoom up on it. So that's I'll zoom up here. Terrible icon, but I'm just gonna hold down Shift Windows key S, which is just screenshot on Windows 10. I'll try and get this approximately square. And now I can right click and say update preview from clipboard, and that is now the icon for that tool. Give it a new name. You can type in keywords. So I can say, well, if I search for the word ladder, and say, okay, I can say I want to add ladder. Now that word didn't exist, so I'll save it in my custom preferences. And then I could, say, I can also add Rocket Lasso. I'll have to end up deleting this, but I've already got Rocket Lasso in there, so I got that. So now if we've got ladderizer, but now we can also just search for the word ladder. We can look at the steps. We also say, okay, but it also kind of looks like a cage. So let's say it's also cage. So I'll say, okay, cool. Save the word keyword cage. So now at any point, if I want, I can, this can all be closed, and Okay, I'll open a new scene file just in case. Let's make a disk shape. And at any point I could say Shift C and give me a ladder. And look, there it is, ladderizer appearing right there. Drag it directly in as a child. And there we go. I've now built my own custom tool, saved it in my asset browser that I can get access to. It's a good idea to save those not to your preferences, but to some new database that you made so that every version of Cinema, you can always link back to that same folder. And now I can drag this in whenever I want and just get this simple effect applied. And it is just doing what it's currently doing. So, you know, always keep in mind that it's going to look weird, but I can duplicate this a second time and now it's going to act upon the second layer. So if I go really skinny, you can see that I was able to take each of those pieces and ladderize them. So you could keep on going deeper and deeper and deeper on that type of thing as well. So yeah, pretty crazy. So yeah, grab this first one, make it super thick. Yeah, actually, I mean, look at the super complex piece of geometry that we just made. And all we did was layer up these two nodes. We keep on going, but it's just going to get like messy as we go beyond because essentially it's not designed to do that. But you can see how those layer up. So yeah, pretty cool that we can do that entire process from doing like a practice run, like a practice stack of, I guess I deleted them. Did I? Yeah, I deleted them. But we had that practice stack of them, and then we made a tool, and we made the settings for the tool, and then we saved the tool, and now we can just bring it into our scene files whenever we need to. Any repetitive task, any special thing, just able to drag it in. And in addition to that, now there's also presets. Now, obviously we only have one setting here, but you do, if we had a tool that had a bunch of different settings here, we could say, you know, make a new setting, say save preset. We'll just say ladderizer skinny, save in preferences. And we can also make a ladderizer thick. Save that into preferences. So now at any point I could say like, oh, give me a preset, and you actually get a little, actually, I don't know if it's an active preview, but at least it's an image of, it's definitely not an active preview, but you can double click on one of those and just jump to those presets. So pretty cool. I'm pretty sure on these presets, you could go and put custom icons on. You definitely can put custom icons, etc. And I think it even goes to the point of if I search for ladder, you're actually going to, down here in a lower priority, you're also going to see the presets. So I could immediately be like, oh, I'm going to want my ladder skinny. So I can drag that one in and it will load it as that preset. So there's a lot of power for making a tool, customizing a tool to do several different things and saving those presets. And keep in mind that doesn't go just for things you made. It goes for all sorts of presets. So that functionality only got added into 0.2, like the newest version of Cinema. Prior to that, you couldn't. But if you go into some of the Rocket Lasso tools here, let's just search Rocket Lasso, which will now include ladderizer. We can grab a grid, drag the grid in, and before we couldn't, but now we could ship this with presets, or you can make your own presets where like right now we've got these individual lines, but I can say, okay, but I want to make a preset where this is going to be a 5 by 5 by 5 grid where there is some gap in between these lines like so, and then save that as a preset. And we could do the exact same thing. Save it as a preset, so now you get a grid which is 5 by 5 by 5 by 5. Save that, and now that would be something that's instantly accessible that you can pop open just by searching or clicking on the object and jumping to the preset. And obviously in something like a cloner where you might change dozens of settings, that would be really, really powerful. Okay, so that was a long streak of talking straight. I'm going to go and check out the chat. I know a lot of this chat's responding to things I was saying earlier. Yeah, the tech stuff definitely was stuff that we desperately need in something like Illustrator. I almost make everything, like even simple graphics that I should be making in Photoshop or Illustrator, I just make them in Cinema because it's so much quicker. Like I do all my text work in Cinema because you can do things like that, build simple rigs. Can the spline trim capsule, which is one of Rocket Lasso's capsules, work properly with the spline deformer? I think so. If I'm reading you correctly, what's a good way? This is silly, but let's do a big stress test. I'm gonna steal a fancy spline from this scene file. Delete. We don't need to worry about any of this. And let's make it way bigger. T for scale. Okay, cool. So here's just here's a plant from Cinema, and I just converted it to a spline by selecting some edges. You'll see that they're not physically connected, but there's a bunch of different lines. So anyway, we got fancy spline, nice and clean. So the question right now is, can we use a trim spline now along with the spline deformer? First of all, for anybody who's not familiar, there is another Rocket Lasso tool, and this one is called Rocket Lasso. And down here, you can see that there is something called the trim. This one you actually do get if you just have a C4D subscription. But anyway, let's drag trim in as a child. And this is well, it has a couple different functions. But in the most basic form, you can just trim a spline. You see I can erase out from the start or I can erase out from the end. And the goal here was just to make a tool where you can have one slider from default and animate in your spline. So you see, yeah, we just animate that up. So working great. Now, obviously we have additional functionality where we could like trim it in a little bit on each edge. Now we've just got shorter spines. I could then say invert, and it's going to return just the tips from either side. There's it's per segment or overall. And then let's say, yeah, right now it's per segment. I can turn that off, and you see I can actually erase it out like segment by segment. So a lot of functionality there. And then we could say just display 25% of this and then put like an offset in. So you can see I have it travel along, or we can even keyframe it where each second, 5% of it will travel. And you know, see I've got an automatic animation on it. We say per segment, and I can see all of them will be traveling along slowly. Go a little quicker. So yeah, that's some basics of the trim spline. It does a lot more than just that, but those are some basics. So having that context, you're saying use the spline deformer. So you might be doing a more specific context here, but I'm thinking let's just make a nice simple, actually we should be able to, I'm going to make a helix. Let's face it upward. No extra points. We'll drop that down to like 25 just so there's not that many points there. Actually, I'm going to leave it up pretty high and we'll spin this around more. So yeah, something like that. Radius of 5 by 5. There we go. We probably even need more points, 200. So now we've got this little spiral. And if I say deform and we say spline wrap, I'm assuming you meant spline wrap? Just to clarify, where was the question? Shane, were you talking about, when you said spline deformer, did you mean spline wrap? Because that's where my brain went. So anyway, I'm going to drop that in. Based on Y+, it's going to copy onto what spline? It's going to trim onto this grass spline. And now you see we get these fun little spirals on everything. So you can see that I'll hide the original spline. Let's hide the deformer. And now you see we get these nice little spring. So we got a springy plant. That's actual spline wrap. Can do a bunch of different things. Not spline wrap, spline. There is no spline. There's spline war. There's, I'm sorry, there's, oh, that one? I never use this one. I can't even answer that question. I don't know. Like, how do you even use that deformer? I never know how to use it. Original spline, modifying spline. Yeah, sorry. I wish I had a better answer, or I had an answer. But I'm going to continue what I thought you were asking. So you see we got all these little springs traveling around. So now, after they've been warped, let's grab another copy of the trim spline. And as long as we put it after that spline wrap, it should work. And I can just rewind here, and you can see rewind this end down, pull it back, and you see that's actually going to erase out the spiral. And we get these nice little spiral plants going. Whee! Or, you know, we could be keyframing that, animating it. Now, that could also put this on the original spline here, on the grass spline. And if it'll give a very different effect by putting it here. Because now we're actually shrinking the plant. Like all those individual lines are shrinking. So now those will stretch out. So, yeah, depending on where you put these modifiers, you get very, very different effects. Having done that, I haven't been saving the scene files, but... Spring plant trim. Let's see if I can learn how to use the spline deformer, because I never use this thing. Never, ever. So I'm thinking, let's make an open spline. and an arc. And I'll say that the original spline is the arc, the modifying spline is the helix, and it doesn't do anything. That's weird. Why does radius change the spline shape? Is that a weird customized spline? Yeah, see, I never use this thing, and it doesn't make any sense to me. But I could just be being obtuse. But it's not doing anything. What is it supposed to do? Is it supposed to be deforming a model? Bloop. Oh, yeah. So if I remember correctly, you draw one spline and you draw a modified spline. And then this is going to try and map it from one spline to the other. If I remember correctly. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Original spline. Yeah, okay, so if I understand this correctly, I'm going to make that editable. And we'll do a simple edge there. Search for the word edge. So we can do I'll search for edge to spline because I'm not seeing it right away. There's an edge to spline. Okay, I've got a spline now. So that's the original spline. So I'll make a duplicate original. So if we say, okay, that is the original spline. Here's the modifying spline. Should probably zero everything back out again. So now my assumption is if I were to grab this spline and drag it, yeah, so now it's like it's modifying from one spline to the other. I just never have a use case for this thing, so I constantly forget what it does. So anyway, I've refigured out what it does. It seems to have, and it's going to affect things based on the radius, so that's what that radius is going to do. So you see that's going to fall off from there. Potentially we could feed in multiple splines where we could have several things in a row and have them all travel. Now your question was, can you use a trim spline with this? And there's a good chance we can't, because this is counting on similar point counts. So watch, if we grab the trim and put it on this modified version, and then I start trimming away the spline, yeah, you see how even though it's seeing the final deformed version of it, we're changing the point count. My assumption here would be, even though it's not really changing anything, it looks fine. If I pull up the start, I wouldn't be surprised if it starts breaking. It doesn't break, but it's clearly not doing anything. Now, something you could try is put this into a connect object, don't weld rather, and then say, hey, look at that connect. So it's seeing the modified version. Oh, it won't even accept it won't accept the connect in. It only accepts spline. So that's kind of a limiting factor. Now, if we want to still keep this vanilla cinema, there might be a way around that. So we could still do the trim, although the trim wouldn't be strictly necessary here, but I guess we'll keep it in the rig. Can't use a connect, but what we could potentially do is we need two splines with identical point counts. What I want to say, and I'm not even sure if it will accept it or not, but if we use the Rocket Lasso plugin, which of course you can get 40% off right now, but if I say utility splines, and I say resample, I can say, okay, I want to take that original spline and resample it. I want to take this modified spline and resample, and I'll set this to count. So I can say this is going to, no matter what the length is, it's going to have exactly 10 points. So there are now exactly 10 points in them. So as the order of operations says, this modifies that, and then that will resample the point. And this needs to be fed the original, and it needs to be refed the sampled one, the resampled one. So now if I grab the trim and start trimming that, now you can see, because I'm using the Rocket Lasso tool to maintain the point count, that actually will work. I can trim either spline. So you could also drag that to the original and say, actually, the original geometry will be trimmed, and it's going to do a very different effect, which does make sense. So yeah, it's all about point count. Point count needs to be maintained. But yeah, the first time we've ever used the spline deformer in a live stream. I'm curious what people, especially Shane, since you were asking the question, trim spline deformer, and this is using utility splines. Shane, I'm curious, Shane, what you actually use this for, like in a project. I'm going to check out YouTube, see if there's any questions over there. Cycle. I think it might be cycle. Pronunciation. Apologies if it's not. But when we were talking about the tech stuff, it's like, oh, I do everything inside of Cinema instead of doing it in Illustrator if I can get away with it. And they were saying that you could also use a Sketch and Tune renderer and export them as Illustrator because the splines will become paths, which is totally true. You can also do things like export as a DXF. If you export as a DXF, it will see spline lines, and you can import those into Illustrator as well. So keep that in mind. Demis, yes, we were making a new capsule. Oh, we were building a capsule. Excellent. Demis, does classic animation work with ragdoll dynamics? Well, we're specifically on the node topic today. That's a good question, though. Maybe hit me with that next week. Arc, I'll just say Arc was asking, why don't we drag and drop them? I'm assuming that's referring back to the nodes, where you could drag and drop them. If we had it in the asset browser, you could drag and drop. If I'm searching for them, you can't, or you can drag and drop them. I mean, I think I was dragging and dropping. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Welcome, people who are showing up. Ruckus was saying that we could have deleted the first and last crossbars on the ladder, which is potentially a way. And actually, as a question, just something I don't know, open up a new file, and let's make kind of that ladder again. We'll just go one by this. So can we, via the select, so I'm going to say select, and I could say select 1. So that should just, actually I want to say select 0. So that's just polygon 0. So if we then said delete, that should delete just one polygon off the end. My question is, can we type in -1? No. So you would need to know your polygon count. See, I could delete the first one, but I can't delete the -1. So we'd have to know the count. And because we are using that as an external tool, it's not trivial to do. We can delete the first one. We can't delete the last one easily. And that's because we're using, if we were making a proper, not ladderizer, but like just ladder, then we wouldn't make a ladder in the object manager. We'd also make that geometry either raw or a node plane object. And then we have more direct control of it. And no, we'd understand how many subdivisions there were and everything. Where we just kind of made a geometry deformer, which was agnostic as to the type of object we put it on. There is a node called border, but the border, I guess we could, well, I don't like the border selection, but as a, well, people are still trying to solve that ladder problem, but keep in mind that there would probably be significantly better ways of doing that. I mean, in some ways, it's like the stuff we were doing there was a little bit, I mean, there's so many different ways of doing everything, obviously. But if we were making an object or a model, keep in mind we could just search for, or let's go into nodes again. Let's make an asset construction. We could make a mesh primitive. So before we made a geometry deformer, but now we're making a brand new object. So this brand new object could be the ladder. And now inside of it, you'll see that now it's not giving us anything. We have to build everything from scratch. So nothing's coming in for free, but then we do output a final geometry. But having, you know, if we're now building this from scratch, yeah, that makes sense. So if we were building this from scratch, and we have lots of options, like we could, if I double click, there is a bunch of different, there is a bunch of different primitives. Like I can make a plane object. You see, it's not in the object manager, it's just in here. And I can say that is my final geometry. And there it is. Like we've now generated a plane. But now in nodes, we can say it's actually supposed to be 1 by 10 by 20. And now you see we get this final geometry. But then I could, you know, we could do additional things like give me a cube. And even right now, I could just make a connect, give me final geometry that will be the combination of that geometry and this geometry, and give me that as the final output. And let's shrink this cube down. So you can see we got both of those objects. So based on this, we could grab a cube and say, okay, the cube will have like a certain height, and it's going to be a certain width, and like it's looking a particular way. We could offset the position. Another deformer that I often use is just a transform. And you can think of this transform element is the name. And that's just going to take raw geometry, and we could do things like move it and scale it and rotate it, but we're not doing it to the object, we're doing it to like the mesh. So in a lot of ways you can think of it like the plane effector, where the plane effector is like, well, it's just doing everything to everything. But that, you know, can be incredibly useful. So in this case, we could say, okay, this is going to offset this on P, and these, you know, that's one version. But then we could even here, you look, because it's nodes, I could say, well, let's take the other one, and we'll say that that should actually be going 4. And now on the connect, I can say, well, give me another element. And now in this geometry, I get another one. And this transfer, yeah, this one will be positive 4, and that one's negative 4. So from one cube, we've now made 2 copies of it by going down 2 different branching paths, re-merging them as a connect, and now we've got this completely separate model here. So, and, you know, this isn't a cloner. This is actually, you know, deforming geometry, essentially. So, you know, this is how I would actually start building that kind of thing properly. I was just trying to keep it all as simple as possible. But yeah, from these, you can do things like rotate or scale. You know, so you get a lot of control over that type of thing. We could have also used a clone node there. There ends up being like so many possibilities. We could have 2 different cubes, each feeding in separately. We could be drawing all these completely from scratch, like from raw points. Like we can actually, you know, build, like, you know, we're not going to get into it, but, you know, you can build entire arrays where it's like, oh, we're building a data structure. It's going to be a giant list of vectors. So here's vector 3s, and we can add as many manual points in as we want. And when you think about a cube, it's like, well, a cube is just made of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Connect them in the proper ways. Okay, we've now made a cube from raw math, essentially. So it's all about just adding in these bits of raw math, getting your final object. And even that, like, you know, if you want to continue on the ladder, there's our, you know, search for the inset. And then we would have needed to select that. So select right there. Select all, and then we do the inset, and then we need that delete, all things that we learned in the previous one. There we go. And now there's a, you know, now we've got a very basic ladder generator. Obviously there's a bunch of things we can do a million times better, but, you know, now you see we are able to build those as completely separate components, and it is just, when it's ultimately getting output, it's just raw geometry that we could have parameters for, and then eventually this could even just be made editable and it get polygons. So it's behaving essentially exactly as a C4D object. So yeah, it can be pretty cool. Layer things up. Bits of raw math would make a hell of a t-shirt. I agree. Bihavana, welcome. I don't like clicking drive links and whatnot, but yeah, I see. I guess for completion's sake, here's what Shane is trying to do. I think I did an entire live episode trying to tackle this concept. Yeah, you don't need to do this. You are, yeah, I see what you're doing, but you don't need to use a spline deformer for that. You can just do a plane. Do a plane effector as a deformer and drag the spline in. Tobias, I'm not sure what you mean by select all and do a shrink selection. I already did. If you're trying to talk about selecting the inner edges, we literally tried that. It might not be what you're talking about, though. Temo, that'd be something maybe we can tackle next week. Right now, we're kind of focused on node stuff. I'm not sure about opening a banana in node stuff. Potentially, you could, because you can get really crazy with all of the math. I guess right now, something to go tackle. And if anybody has any questions about like building this type of stuff or trying to make something, throw it out there. That would be cool. I'll save this file just in case somebody might find it useful. Let's look at another tool or two that Rocket Lasso has built. Like one that I haven't talked about too much, but I think is really cool is the swirl deformer. So if we search for, again, Rocket Lasso, if you have your Maxon 1 subscription, you can go in here and you'll see that we've got a swirl deformer. So I guess the most obvious use case for this is just making a plane deformer. And we'll subdivide it a bunch of times. Or, I'm sorry, a plane object. And now we drag the deformer as a child. And now you see, boom, we got swirl. Swirling it around. It'd be nice to make a checkerboard pattern. Just, I'll say standard, make a material, color channel, surfaces, checkerboard. There you go. Simple, super simple way of visualizing that. So here is a swirl deformer we made. If I were to, it's better to see the nodes. Well, it kind of explodes, but let's say edit asset this group. And you see inside here that we're going to have all this different stuff going on. Things like height and ridges and whatnot. If I were to, this is the clean version, but if we right click and say ungroup and select all and say ungroup, and there might be more, right click and okay, that's all the groups. So these are all, this is actual nodes needed to do all that math. Obviously not very organized right there. So we did the math in there, but you can do the raw math and make a deformer. So yeah, here's a swirl deformer we made. I think, you know, this is the type of thing that I think, you know, totally deserves either an official Maxon treatment or, you know, it's something that lives like essentially right alongside one of these deformers because it actually does quite a bit. So here is, you know, it just doing a swirl effect, but let's pull that material off and check out some additional features. So in the swirl, we can set the radius. Wherever we position the actual deformer, it's going to be deforming it. So you get some cool effects like that. In the inside here, we can do, let's just go to object. So the, you know, main parameters are not too complicated. Height is pretty powerful, where we can say, actually, there's going to be a vortex, and it's going to be pulling everything down. And then we've got our ridge count. So we could, let's reset that, and we could add additional ridges or fewer ridges. You really need those ridges to be able to see the effect. I could say get rid of the ridges, or set that down to 0. And let's not swirl quite so much. And you see it's like, oh, that just looks completely normal and flat. But you'll see if I put the material on there that we are actually spinning it around. So, but it's the ridges that make it, that you can actually see the swirl by default. But anyway, making some ridges, and then we can pull it down a little bit. We can make those ridges taller if we want to. And then we've got a ridge offset. You see I can grab that and spin, or as I like to put in every tool, we can give it some speed. So right now it's going to rotate 90 frames every second. So you see that we get this constant swirl pulling down. We could make an ice cream cone by pulling it up, have those spin around. We've got under advanced, we've got an inner radius and fade, so that will help with the tip right there. That needs a little bit of love. Yeah, just so it's not popping on the top, just from like your current poly count. But yeah, we get these swirling around. We can reshape the stuff via the bias, where you can have it like bulge near the top, it gets pulled more towards the bottom. Mostly I just play with these different settings, like if the swirl effect should be like pulled near the beginning or near the top. But what's cool is there's almost like several effects that we can do here, where right now we got the swirl effect, and that's like the basic functionality. It's just like, okay, we've got this swirl happening where it's actually taking geometry and twisting it around. So that's this swirl. And of course, like anything like a twist or a bend, you can push it so far it explodes. But so that's one effect, is twisting. But we say, hey, don't worry about any twist. Well, then you still got kind of this cool height deformer, where it's almost like a black hole being generated. So it's kind of just a cool shape by itself, being able to generate something like that. Especially with the swirl being able to be deformed. It's a deformer, so you can move it around, and you can also rotate it, and you can have this thing be angled and make different shapes that way. So yeah, I really dig the swirl. But in addition to height, let's zero that out. We've also got pull. So if we add some pull, it's almost like this, again, black hole effect, but it's like a vortex where it's pulling everything towards the center. And I think you can overload this one and keep pulling. It's going to keep pulling more and more and more of that geometry. So even right here, just kind of a cool black hole effect you could do is if I were to keyframe just the radius here, you can see I've got really heavy pull, and now we could just keep on increasing the radius and eventually suck all the geometry in. So let's make something like the figure. Drop it inside there and just start increasing the radius. And even that, layering that, maybe, I guess it swirls during the transition, so you might not see too much of it spinning with that much pull. But yeah, all of those can combine and make some pretty cool effects. Swirling on the figure. Swirl. Whoa. And then, pull also, let's pull this back in to here. Pull can be reversed. Let's give it a solid radius again. And you can actually push. So if we say negative, oops, too big. If I say negative, so here's pulling in, but we can also always go negative. So you see it's actually going to bulge it outward. And that gets reshaped by the pull here. So we can pull it, bias it in, bias it out. Right now it's a really heavy bias. So if we go more towards 0, that should be able to go a little more extreme. Yeah. So you get, a cool kind of lensing effect right there, 2-dimensionally. But that could combine with some height, and that can combine with some swirling. All those layer up together and get some pretty cool effects. And yeah, this one just is, it's a deformer. It's just all math. Looks like it got covered in a pile of snow. Let's see. Remake a sweep capsule with built-in end side and 3 parameters, start, end, and sides. I mean, that would be, I think there's a sweep inside, so that would be a relatively straightforward thing. There's a couple changes I'd like to see made to the actual sweep. So that wouldn't be giving, there's a sweep line. You could build yourself a preset tool that would do that. That's for sure. Ooh, actually, that's a great idea. Cycle. Is it cycle? Can you type your name out phonetically? I'll try and remember it for the future. I might have asked you that again in the past, but years go by. Anyway, I really like that question. So I'm even going to do this from scratch. So here's the basic idea. And this is literally something I was showing off at NAB. If we grab a raw swirl, so it's like, okay, well, here's a swirl, and we can make it pretty big. I'll increase the radius so we're kind of affecting everything. And it's going to start at, let's do, I guess we could do some ridge. Well, you don't need to, though. Yeah, let's just keep it messy. So I think the basic idea is at the time of 0, let's give ourselves 200 frames. At the time of 0, we'll have 0 swirl, keyframe. And then up to 150, I'm going to start increasing this and go swirl, 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 swirl. You see I'm really twisting that around. Like we're going almost 2,000 degrees around. Obviously, that looks terrible. Like, it's like, okay, it looks okay until we get a certain point where the polygons are like starting to pinch on top of each other. It's just, the nature of twisting something that much. Okay, so, that's a thing. Let's temporarily turn that off. And then let's add some cloth on here. Simulation, cloth. First thing I'll do is no gravity. So simulation, scene, 0 gravity. So, okay, everything's behaving as expected. If I play, it's just hanging out doing its thing. I'm going to yank that off for a moment because there's another thing I want to do. So if I hit play right now, you're going to see, okay, that's swirling around, doing its thing. What I'd like it to also do is shrink. So I'm going to say an easy way to do that is make a spherify. So let's make a spherify with a radius of, 25, pretty small. And drop that after the swirl. So now you can see that as I increase the strength, it's just shrinking down. I don't want to go to 0, so you can see how it's all shrinking down there. But we could, we just set whatever radius we want. So we'll also say that as that's swirling, the strength is slowly increasing up to the time of 150, and it's going to have shrunk down pretty dang small. So now you can see what's happening. It's shrinking and swirling, and it's done. That's pretty ugly. Here's where things get awesome. And let's see if it works. And I'll save it just because dangerous simulation stuff. Swirl. Yeah, swirl cloth. So here's where it gets great. We put that cloth, zero gravity, onto the plane. If I play right now, absolutely nothing happens. It doesn't care about that. But we've got the absolutely amazing mix animation tab. So we can use with force or we can use with pins. Let's do with force to begin with. Actually, we'll do with pins. Right now the influence is up at 100%. I can't remember the perfect numbers. I think it might have been like around 14, 13. Let's try 13% pins. This means the cloth at any given moment, every point is pinned to wherever the deformed version of it has moved to. So it's like a physical pin saying, I'm tugging you directly into where I currently am. And right now it's at 13%. So now, just by doing that, turning on pins and influence, let's hit play. And now you see it start swirling. And then you see it start crumpling. And then we see we get a big bundle of cloth in the middle. Look at how little work we did. And we get this perfect swirling, crumpling effect with like cloth folding in on itself, but not crossing through itself. That's incredible. Like, look at how good that is. Now, if we increase our influence, I could say 25%, and that's probably going to scrunch it in like way more. I probably don't want to go quite that strong because it's, you know, as they start crashing in, they have to do more calculations to not pass through. But anyway, look at how easy this is. I think there's probably a bunch of tutorials and stuff where people are doing this with different types of wind. You don't have to do that. You just do a couple of deformers and then say, hey, cloth, do your best to achieve that shape. So yeah, there we get a nice little collapsing. We can do different shapes in here. I mean, if we deform, we'd have to keyframe in the deformation. But yeah, that's really cool. We could do it with force. There is a difference between pins and force. Force, instead of being like a pin, is saying like, try and get to directly where I am. This is more like there's a wind blowing at every single point. And the wind is telling that point to blow in the direction of where the modified version is. Ultimately, they're not that different, but you definitely see some different effects. So you can see even here at default, like, I tend to feel like pins is more precise and force is more organic. It's a little softer looking, but you can, you know, crank up the power of the force here, or with force, and you're going to get, you know, it can really crumple in as well. And yeah, there's a lot going on. And, you know, every setting here matters. If we put less thickness on the cloth, it can pinch even tighter. We'd say that the cloth can be like way bendier, and then you're going to see it's going to want to, it's allowed to scrunch in more just because it's bendy. A little stretch can go a long way here, where it's like, oh, something wouldn't be allowed to stretch, so it prevents some bending, where here it can. Quad diagonals definitely is going to prevent some of the bending, but here I think you want the structure. But if we put these to 0, you're going to see it's going to try, like, even just by dropping the bendiness from 5 to 0, you see that, yeah, it's willing to crumple in, but it doesn't want to bend that much. So it turns like way more flowy. Like, look at how soft that looks versus a bend of 5 here. And of course, it's going to be different at what time you did it. But like at 5, look how much more it's scrunching in. And I don't think it's going to be terribly different, but at 55 with like 10 times as much bend, we can see that, yeah, it's even more wrinkly and crumply, like a very different look. And that's just between changing this bend parameter single-handedly. And of course, that's something that could be keyframed, or you could twirl this down and apply a vertex map in different spots. So yeah, mix animation with pins, with force, ultimate in being able to control your simulations, like art direct them and do really cool looking things. So yeah, absolutely incredible. Just because we got some extra people in the chat, I'm going to go and do a quick recap that right now, we've been spending a lot of time talking about nodes just in general, but there is that, if I can say so myself, awesome collection of Rocket Lasso nodes, and every month we're launching a new one. Don't count the ladder, we just built that in the stream. So we've already got these 8 tools, and there's more on the way for things like the electricity spline modifier, and we've got the graph spline, which is like amazing, the stair generator, this wave spline, very useful. Bunch of different of these, and you only get access to a lot of these if you have Maxon 1. And right now, Maxon has a giant sale going on right here. So you got this giant Maxon campaign, and if you go and you buy a brand new subscription, so you can't have an existing one extend. You need to be buying it for the first time, or not first time, but getting the subscription without having an active one, I think. You get Maxon 1, which means you get Cinema 4D, Red Giant, Redshift. I think Universe kind of comes along with that. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. And ZBrush, that's a big one. You essentially get Cinema 4D and ZBrush are the big ones for 40% off, which is the biggest sale Maxon has had in, I think, over 3 years. They probably won't have another sale like that for a long time. And the best part, well, the best part for everybody here who likes Rocket Lasso is you can use Rocket Lasso's code, here, and I'm going to put it in the chat again. If you use this code, it's a special code I got from Maxon, where I get where Rocket Lasso, so me and my brothers working on all the tools, will get a referral for people wanting to go and get Maxon 1. And the best part about getting it through Rocket Lasso is you'll also get a coupon code from us. We'll have to get the contact stuff from Maxon or have them pass along the code, but we're going to also do 40% off all the Rocket Lasso plugins for anybody who picks up a copy of Maxon 1. And like I said, the bonus there is you get super deep discount on Maxon 1, which includes a bunch of extra tools, 40% off all the Rocket Lasso plugins. So we've got our 5 different plugins, including utility spines, which is 5 plugins in one. And then you also get access to all of the nodes that Rocket Lasso is making. And that's also not even counting things like inside of just, if you're just a Cinema 4D user, if you have Maxon 1, every month they're putting out like new materials, new models. Here's practice or demo scenes of the stuff we've been making. Like material, like tons of stuff, HDRs. You get access to a lot of bonus extra content. And that content, essentially they're only able to make that content because of subscribers. Otherwise, it'd just be like, well, it'd just be the regular stuff. That stuff wouldn't be getting created if it wasn't for subscriptions. It's not like, oh, if there's no subscriptions, everybody would get it. It's like, no, if there's no subscriptions, they wouldn't be making that at all. And that includes all the stuff Rocket Lasso is making. So anyway, that's just the pitch. If you want to support Rocket Lasso, you've been looking to get Cinema 4D, this is the best way to get it, the best time to get it right now. It's just for the next day or two. Anyway, end of pitch. So yeah, anyway, I've been super duper digging doing these techniques. Very simple deformations, and swirl is just such a perfect deformation to be able to do this type of thing. Let's go even crazier on it. I'm going to yank the cloth tag off, and let's take a second swirl. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. I don't even know what this is going to look like. Hit play. Oh, I thought there'd be some verticality to that. Does it not rotate? That's weird. Is that the maybe we disabled that part. That's cool. Well, I want to get some rotation on there, but it's not quite cooperating. I don't want the second one. I changed my mind. But sloppy deformations, like just rough animation, tell cloth to like, hey, do the best you can on top of it. Getting this result, like that's crazy. That's so simple. Like that's 2 keyframes, and you can get that animation. And I've said it before on the stream, but the important thing when it comes to any simulation is like simulation is simulation. It's cool, but simulation, when you get things like mix animation, it's not a simulation anymore. Now it's a motion graphics tool. Now you can be art directing like cloth and balloons and deforming text to form particular shapes. And, once you can do this type of thing, now you're doing motion graphics. That tech, there we go. Let me check if there's any questions. Further, when you're putting a black hole on the figure. Agreed. Chris is here. Chris Pianco in nodes manipulating points. Oh, that's an interesting point. Like, yeah, if we were limiting the selection of things, like I think the swirl deformer might automatically apply to all of the selection. And it's not easy to go edits, but I'm pretty sure we can't limit the selection on that, but I am curious. So let's just do a select and yeah, say I want to go with 0 through, there's quite a few here, so let's just say 0 through 100. No, the swirl, just like a deformer by default, is acting on everything. Unfortunately, right now, we can't plug fields in. Like, I would love to be able to limit this via fields. We just can't do that yet in nodes. But, in the future, I'd love to talk a little bit about electricity, which is one that I find myself using surprisingly often. So that is one that definitely works really well in the context of some text as well. So if I were to say, hey, here's text, we do some of the other stuff too. Let me bring in that axis, geometry axis again, so we can center that out. Let's say nodes again. Let's grab lemon milk again. Boom. Oh yeah, so we got nodes. And then we can grab, well, other deformers. We already talked about trim, but trim, we can drop that in. And trim will also work on text, so you can get some really nice text animation like that. Or even like just limit that and then give it some rate and hit play. And now those will be traveling around forever. Lots of possibilities there. So that's trim, but then we also have our dash spline. So you can drop that in, and you see we get a lovely dashed spline now off of an entirely parametric setup. That dash is currently set on length, so if we were to put a trim before the dash, I could shrink this in, and you can see how we get the dash line after the fact. Let's turn on end snap, I think. Yeah, it makes it a little cleaner. Yeah, dash spline, we set an exact count. If we change the order, the trim will now act on these individual little dashes. So yeah, the order here really matters. But yeah, dash spline, there's a bunch of different settings inside a dash. One of the fun ones to me, well, you do a count or a percentage, but you can also do custom. And I like this one because you can add in as many of these different bools as you want. So you could say, I want on, off, on, off, off. And now it's going to repeat that pattern over and over again. So you can just make that as short or as long as you want, get super customized patterns. So I super dig that one. But my favorite, my baby here is the electric spline modifier. So we drop this in and we can get instant electricity effects on top of any spline. But there's a lot of really fun details that make this super controllable and give options that we wouldn't get otherwise. So here we are in text. Typically, well, how do I say this? Usually, this is designed to work on like open splines, not exclusively, but you see here that if we have this big open spline, that we have it so it's fading out at the start and fading out at the end, because maybe this was supposed to be static. So here's like how far in it's going to blend, so we can make it really sharp to the edge. And then we can say, hey, fade out on the start, fade out on the end. So it's kind of designed with an open spline in mind, but we did a bunch of work to make sure that it would also work on closed splines as well. So you'll see that usually we have this fade going on. So you'll see that on this E, that this corner is like the start and end of the spline. That's where the spline actually closes. Now, if I get rid of the start fade and the end fade, do you see it's a little bit hard to see, but see how we get this one straight line because the tips are trying to connect to each other, and it's just kind of, it's messing it all up because, when you saw in the helix, like those two ends are unrelated from each other. So we can't sample both of them, but we built in this blend, the start and end setting. So it kind of is going to crossfade between them just a little bit, just to hide where that blend effect is happening. So, an easy way of just, a couple percentage, and now you can hide those edges. So you get this nice electricity effect applied everywhere there. But, within this context, there's so many additional things that are pretty cool. Let me, I guess we can do it in a slightly different form. This isn't, there's a new tool that's going to be getting launched soon that does a lot of really cool effects, but we can actually kind of fake it with some of the current stuff. Let me find the file. Demo file, circuit. And I'm just going to steal something from this file. Okay, keep this nice and simple. Okay, so here's a giant plane. And in this giant plane, I manually drew all of these line selections. So I went and drew all those out. So there's no easy tool to do that, although, that's maybe an idea for the future. Shift-C, edge to spline. And now I can pull that out, hide this, and look at that. We've got circuit board. So circuit board, what do I want to do now? Let's search for trim, and we'll drag that in. And I would like to trim and see just a small portion. Yeah, the other tool is going to do a much better job of this. I guess we can set, no, length won't work. So this isn't going to be perfect, but let's do a little bit of length, and then let's set a rate of, I don't know, 25%. So let's do 55%. Okay, yeah, so we got these now traveling around. So it's a little bit limited right now because these short lines and big lines don't work too well, but you know, something in the future is going to make this look even cooler. But anyway, now I've got these like kind of circuit things traveling around. So now I'll say, hey, after you've been trimmed, I want you to run some electricity. So now we got electricity running along. Don't worry about blending. I think I would like it to fade on the end. And right now it's really intense, so let's like pull way back on this effect. There we go. So now we can get some lighter electricity. Now we see electricity traveling along. If we duplicate that original spline, we now see the original. And on the modified one, let's just change the color. Make it bright blue so you can actually see it. So now we see you get these electricity lines like traveling around, doing their thing. Now right now they are three-dimensional. You see that they've got thickness on the top and the bottom, but even within the electric spline, we can say, hey, relative scale, don't do anything on Y. So now they still look super electrical, but if I go to the side, you'll see that there's no height to them. So they're completely flat. So you can do that on kind of any of those. In addition to that, there's a lot of lines right here. Let's decrease the step sampling. Maybe go a little bit further on that. And pull back in the 100% there. Anyway, another feature that I love inside of the electric spline that I find myself using surprisingly often is this clone count. So if I say clone count, right now it's just, well, it's just the original line. But I can say, give me a copy of each. So now each line that we're feeding in has become 2 lines, or I could say 3 lines. So now we get triple layers of electricity on each one of those. So I hit play, and now we've got triple electricity without having to make 3 copies of the rig. So yeah, all those lines zipping and traveling along, like pretty cool. You know, I had to make that original spline, but after that, you know, these are just properties that we can go and say, like, have everything travel faster, invert the direction, pull them in. We get, you know, a lot of different things we can modify here. And then I've mentioned this before, but a go-to for me is like, okay, this is doing electric displacement. Let's clean that or simplify. I'll drop this back down to this, but we can do any different type of noise that we want. So this is FBM, which looks nice. FBM is essentially a purlin noise that's layered on top of itself, on top of itself, on top of itself. So it kind of looks good at every zoom level. But we could do something crazier like a Luca noise. And now you can see that certain parts get really intense and other parts will be a little more calm. So maybe let's do a little bit less of an effect. Hit play. But it's like a Luca is also a nice looking electricity, but a different vibe. But let's switch this over to another one I really like, purlin noise. So by default, just a little purlin noise. It's pretty large right now, but you see you can't get these nice little, you know, it's just a nice little variation on top of the existing line. We can even turn this trim off so you can just see how it's like, oh, look at these nice little wobbling lines that we're getting. So that by itself can be pretty useful. And then, like as I said, we could zero it out on Y, and now it's just wobbling lines 2-dimensionally. Or we could say, zero these out and say, actually, I only want the wobbling line on Y. So now these are only traveling up and down, but from the top would look completely flat. So yeah, a lot of options there. Going back to 100% on all of them. Right now it's a very large purlin noise, so it's very soft looking. But if we start increasing our noise frequency, then now the noise is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So you can see that we're starting to see, you know, you can kind of feel the purlin noise there. And now, yeah, I'm going pretty far here. But now you see we get these cute little scribbles going. So yeah, all these scribbly lines. We could, technically you can loop this. I think you can loop this noise. I haven't done this in a while. But yeah, we're at 90 frames. So I'm going to say loop at frame 91, so one after. And now you see as the keyframe goes off the end and goes back to the beginning, it looks identical. So yeah, looping noise on there. And then not so loopable, but we've got our movement rate. So let me try 55. And yeah, now look, these lines aren't physically moving, but the noise is traveling through the indexes of the line. So look at just another really cool effect, again, from electricity. Like this is, you know, I wouldn't call this electricity, but it's an effect you can get, like a scribble. It was actually originally an idea for a separate tool. It's like, oh, a scribble, like a scribble generator. Now we could crank up our speed here. I could say like times 1,000, and we're gonna get something very scribbly looking, like almost every frame is random. We could go nice and slow. Another kind of weird fun setting I put in is this animate, because we got a seed, so I can keep on doing different random seeds. But especially in the context of electricity, like usually the electricity is doing something kind of stable and it pops. So I put this animate in. So if I say every 15 frames, randomize the seed. So now you can see that it's kind of smooth. And then every 15 frames, it's going to be like, oh, randomize the seed, randomize the seed, randomize the seed. So depending on what you're doing, that can create some cool like secondary animation where it suddenly will pop. At 0, it just won't pop. I can turn on override time. I always like putting this type of setting. By overriding time, well, you see right now, time is constantly moving forward. All the noise is animating at a particular speed. But if we say override time, then now you control time. Time has become a keyframeable parameter. So I could say start at a time of 0, end at the time of 0, but in the middle, let's go up to frame 45. So now we should see these, oh wait, that's going to need to, oh, we're not animating. That's not behaving the way I expected it to, which is weird because I designed the tool. Override time, keyframe the time, and it is animating. Oh, maybe there's a bug in that one, and that would be up to me to fix. Oh, I'll have to look into that. Well, I was hoping. Well, I want what it was supposed to look like is that this animation move forward, pause, and then rewind and kind of loop forward and backward. Just the noise. Very specific effect. But I always like the ability to keyframe time, but it doesn't seem like it's keyframing. Actually, a couple things are weird there. Look at the. Did I mess up the way I keyframed? At the time of 0, be 0. At the end, be 0. I feel like this, maybe this is, well, maybe it's something I need to fix. Maybe it's not me. Because you'll see, there's something that looked weird. Like it seemed like the keyframes weren't accurate, but now they seem to be. Well, anyway, seems like a bug. But anyway, well, turning off override time, that's something to look into. Got these, yeah, got the little wiggles going. You get some weird ones. What's the one I like? Is it not mod? I think it might be cell. Yeah, cell. You get these cool, like almost techie looking. In fact, let's just turn off animation speed. Maybe if we want to keep some visual stuff, let's get some movement going. But you see that this is now based on. It's based on cell noise, which is essentially just solid plates of grayscale. And let's zero out a couple of these, and I'll just go up on Y. So now look at these really cool lines that we get just by doing the cell pattern. Just constantly traveling around. Those could be animated, but this type of noise just kind of pops. But yeah, like all of this from like the electric spline modifier. And I feel like so few people even know that this is here. And yeah, this one you get with your Max on 1 subscription. Let's see what that does with animation speed. Yeah, see, when it comes to a cell noise, every once in a while it just pops. That's just that type of noise. And of course, even here we're seeing that's a cell noise. We could be feeding this through any. Like here's just a 2-dimensional version of the Perlin noise. You get these nice little height bits traveling. It's just a way of visualizing the noise. Here's Luca. Let's go with a slightly less detailed Luca. So yeah, here's a big old giant Luca. Let's not fade out. Giant mountains traveling around, doing their own crazy thing. One of the special things we did is that the X, Y, and Z are all calculated from different seeds. So when you do have 100, 100, 100, then now it's like 3 different Luca noises are being calculated to get the different angles. Let's see, what's another cool noise? Voronoi are always kind of nice. Yeah, there's one Voronoi. Here's another Voronoi. Third Voronoi. It's kind of a lot going on right now, but looks cool. Ah, man, love it. So much fun with these. A lot of rigs you could do. But yeah, I'm going to check the chat. Oh, the video compression is not doing so well on Twitch. Unfortunate. Oh, it looks cool zoomed out. But yeah, these are a lot of really thin lines trying to do a lot of detail. If I go into my, what is it, Control E, we can go to viewport display, spline thickness, and I can increase that so we can get thicker lines. Hopefully, I mean, it looks a little uglier on my screen, but hopefully it'll translate a little bit better on little bit better on Twitch. Let's get those scribbles back again. Yeah, scribbles. Checking the chats. Shockingly good. Thanks, Badger. Just a bunch of electricity puns over on the YouTube chat. Can you use fields with the electricity node? Like I said, we don't have strict access to nodes, or we don't have strict access to fields when it comes to these nodes. There's workarounds you could do. There's definitely workarounds you could do. And in the nodes, in a very specific way, you could like feed a vertex map, and the vertex map, of course, could get it, but there are limitations there. So the short answer is not without a lot of effort. Yeah, definitely not without a lot of effort. Choo-choo. Electricity. There we go. Yeah, wish I had a better answer for you there, but then I would love. Well, I love when we get access to fields inside of nodes, but it's not yet. Actually, man, we're almost spot on the time. Scrubbing, checking chat. Next week will be a regular stream. I'll just take everybody's questions. Make sure you gather inspiration from any cool stuff that you see around the internet, or from TV or movies or cartoons, or just stills on the internet. We'll just see what kind of stuff we can make. I like tackling those random questions. But every once in a while, I like doing these themed episodes where we just kind of talk about a topic. And when it comes to nodes, I feel like most people know 0% about it, and there's a lot you can do. And especially it comes to people not knowing about these Rocket Lasso capsules in here. Those are just, it's like, new tools that you didn't even know that you had. And that's not even counting things like, using all those nodes as deformers, like using the delete node and the axis align, things like that. Like those just layer up so nicely, and such a good workflow. So just trying to spread the word about those because they're really cool. Dive in from here. Excellent. Yep. So hopefully, and if anybody makes anything cool, using any node stuff, or especially using any of these Rocket Lasso nodes, or I guess Rocket Lasso tools in general, I always love seeing it, especially post it on the Slack channel. Let me open up a window here. If you're not already, you should head on over to rocketlasso.com, of course, and you can go to the community tab here, and there's a link to join the Rocket Lasso Slack channel. I'll put a link in the chats so you can continue the conversation there. I try and respond when I am available. I do announcements of when I'm going live from there, and certain bonuses and stuff. It's just a nice little community. Come and hang out. And with us being here at the very end, I'll do one last repeat of this stuff. Right now, just for, I think, the next day, you can get Max on 1 for 40% off. So you get access to all those Rocket Lasso nodes I was talking about, and you get 40% off all Rocket Lasso tools, and you get ZBrush and like Red Giant and Redshift. So it's a really, really good deal. Best deal they've had in 3 years. And the important bit here is if you use the Rocket Lasso code, then Rocket Lasso gets a commission from it, which is nice. We've been, I wonder how many copies of Cinema 4D that I have sold directly just via tutorials and streams, and just kind of general loving the software and talking about it all the time. So, it's kind of cool. I dig it. And yeah, then 40% off Rocket Lasso plugins. It's the best deal they've had in years, and it's definitely the highest percentage we've ever had off of any Rocket Lasso tools. So it's a good combo. So if you use that link specifically, then that helps me out. It's a good way of supporting, and hopefully it's, you're picking up some software that you were interested in getting anyway. But I think, JP, don't worry. I will definitely remember to put my spline thickness back down again, because that would drive me absolutely nuts when I'm just working by myself. I should probably, in Windows, I might want to increase the size of my mouse so you can see the mouse size better. Probably be a good idea. But anyway, I think that's going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, everybody, for hanging out for another episode of Rocket Lasso Live. This was episode 10. Next week will be a regular episode. The week after, I'm not so sure. I might be traveling again. And then, of course, the Maxon Roadshow, that's going to be happening, possibly coming to a city near you, even doing a couple cities in Europe. So it's going to be really cool. So you should head to go2dat.com as well. But the important thing today was talking about nodes and capsules and the sale that's going on. But anyway, I shall wrap it up. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you next time in 1 week. Until then, bye-bye.